Good day and welcome. Today I'm going to talk about A Wizard of Earthsea, a 1968 novel by Ursula Le Guin and the first book in the Earthsea series. It was a trilogy, and then I think in the 90s a fourth book came out. I think there's probably even a fifth book now. Um, Either way, so Ursula Le Guin is what you would call a groundbreaking author. A lot of the concepts that she wrote about are really absolutely fascinating concepts um, that are definitely innovative. You see kind of I'll call it a diluted version of it today in progressivism. Ursula Le Guin took a lot of the concepts in modern progressivism and applied them in a science fiction setting. Wizard of Earthsea itself is an interesting story, but one of the things that happens in Wizard of Earthsea is that the two main characters aren't white. Um, Dooney, or Sparrowhawk as he is known, um, is sort of Indian slash American Indian, copper color, and Vetch, who is his best friend and companion on his final quest in the initial book, is actually very dark skinned, African dark skinned. Dooney being darker is alluded to when they're in the village and it's raided by these Viking-like people, and they describe them as being, they describe the raiders, one of whom dies, as being these, tall, pale, blonde-haired people. And kind of the subtext there is that the goat herds of Gaunt, which is where Dooney was from at the time, are not tall and pale and blonde haired. And then later in the book, it explicitly says that his hair is the color, or that he's a darker complexion. And so that was one of those things where Le Guin is trying to introduce diversity into her books, but because it's 1968 when the book was written, um, it's she didn't feel that audiences would be receptive to a lot of forced diversity. So she just kind of scattered hints here and there throughout the book. And if you were reading closely, you'd say, "Oh, look at that! That's interesting." Sparrowhawk is not white. And if you're not reading the books that closely, you're just kind of reading along and not really worrying about everything and following the story. You would say, "Oh, this is a fun story." Um, One of the things that in Earthsea that Le Guin talks about is the consequence of actions. And as you get into the third novel, Sparrowhawk talks about, given the choice between a life of doing and a life of being, that is, being an action hero or being someone who exists and provide things. He sprung towards a life of doing, um, and similar to Luke in Star Wars. He never concentrated on where he was, always looking to the future. And Ged, when he was younger, was the same way. And then as every action has consequences, which then drag you into more actions, and things keep getting more and more and more extreme. Um, and so then you, at some point, you just realize that you've got to pull back, and you can't keep doing actions. Um, which is an interesting philosophy for a fantasy story. Especially when the main hero, Sparrowhawk, um, attempts to summon the dead and releases a shadow on the world. Um, on his first assignment as a full wizard, he manages to bind a dragon to prevent it from harming humans, and then what else does he do? I mean, he does all kinds of stuff. I'm not remembering, but the Ged, or Sparrowhawk, is constantly moving through life and accomplishing things and doing things and going on dangerous quests. And then by book three, he's regretting it. He's like, wow, I wish I hadn't done that. Meanwhile, he's Archmage and one of the most famous people alive in Earthsea. So don't know. It is kind of interesting because the character does have this very action oriented attitude, but he spends a lot of time studying and talking about philosophy in the book. And if you're looking for really fast paced, exciting books, yeah, Earthsea is not it. But it's a good book and it's an interesting book and it explores the consequences of a life of action and what does that mean, and the stories it tells are interesting because all of all of Ged's actions are undertaken in service to others. Once he gets over his youthful indiscretions, he devotes his life to serving others and is fairly successful at it. So the books are fun to read. Maybe you might find them a little slow paced. Um, I remember reading the fourth book in the series once, which really drives the lesson home about a life of action. Where it's the only thing I really remember from it is women talking about men after they always are adventurous and going on adventures, and then at the end they burn out, and then the women have to take care of them. And Ged is kind of at that point in his life. And I read the book. I was like, didn't understand the point of that book, but maybe there was some stuff there that I was missing. I was probably quite a bit younger when I read it, so I might have there's always nuance, but that you might have missed. I was reading the stories like, oh, it's an Earthsea story. It's not going to be like a super fast story, but there's going to be something interesting happen. And I'm like, no, nothing interesting happened. I'm like, wow, that was disappointing. But it is the logical continuation of that theme of the life of action versus the life of being. So overall, this is a great book. Reading this book and then the Hainish cycle, Left Out of Darkness, I will probably talk about at some point, which is the fourth book in the Hainish cycle, which is another really, really, really groundbreaking book. But overall, I would recommend this book. As always, if you've made it this far, I appreciate your time, and I will talk to you later.